Before we dive into this incredible story that will restore your faith in human potential, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. You won't believe what happens when determination meets opportunity in the most unexpected way. This is a story about breaking every limitation that society places on us and proving that the human spirit can achieve the impossible. In every generation, there are moments that challenge everything we think we know about human capability and potential. The story of how one person's journey through darkness led to a moment of perfect clarity on national television demonstrates something profound about the nature of perception, preparation, and the untapped abilities that exist within each of us. What happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2024 would force doctors to reconsider their understanding of sensory compensation, inspire millions of people facing their own challenges, and leave one of television's most experienced hosts questioning the very nature of reality itself. Marcus Richardson had been completely blind since the age of 7. A rare degenerative condition had gradually stolen his sight over the course of 18 months, transforming his world from one of color and light into complete darkness. Now, at 32 years old, he had spent most of his life navigating a world designed for sighted people, developing extraordinary abilities that most people never knew were possible. His other senses had evolved in ways that neurologists found fascinating. He could identify people by the sound of their footsteps from 30 feet away, distinguish between dozens of subtle environmental sounds simultaneously, and navigate complex spaces using echolocation techniques he had taught himself as a teenager. Marcus lived in Portland, Oregon, where he worked as a music teacher at a school for children with visual impairments. His specialty was teaching students how to use their remaining senses to experience the world more fully, showing them that blindness was not a limitation but simply a different way of perceiving reality. He had met his wife, Sarah, at an advocacy conference 6 years earlier. She was a speech therapist who worked with children with developmental disabilities, and they had bonded over their shared belief that every person possessed unique capabilities that society often failed to recognize or value. Together, they had built a life filled with music, laughter, and a determination to challenge stereotypes about disability at every opportunity. The Family Feud opportunity had come about through Marcus's brother, David, who had submitted an application for their family months earlier. David believed that their family dynamic would make for entertaining television. Their parents had immigrated from Jamaica 30 years ago and had raised 5 children with a strong emphasis on education, humor, and resilience. The Richardson family was known in their community for their quick wit and their ability to find joy, even in difficult circumstances. When the producers called to say they had been selected as contestants, the family was thrilled. Marcus, however, had concerns about how his blindness might be perceived on national television. He worried about being seen as inspirational simply for existing, a phenomenon that disability advocates call inspiration exploitation. But his family convinced him that appearing on the show was an opportunity to demonstrate that blind people could participate fully in any activity without special treatment or lowered expectations. The preparation phase revealed the family's competitive nature and Marcus's extraordinary abilities. They held practice sessions every evening for 3 weeks, drilling each other on common Family Feud questions and studying patterns in survey responses. Marcus's approach to preparation was characteristically thorough and methodical. He downloaded audio recordings of dozens of past episodes and listened to them repeatedly, analyzing not just the questions and answers, but the rhythm and pacing of the game. He paid attention to Steve Harvey's voice patterns, learning to detect subtle changes in tone that might signal when an answer was particularly good or surprisingly unusual. He studied the sound of the buzzer, the audience reactions, and the way contestants spoke when they were confident versus when they were uncertain. What made Marcus's preparation remarkable was his ability to create complete mental models of the game show environment without ever having seen it. He worked with his wife to build a tactile model of the Family Feud stage layout using cardboard and string. He practiced walking to the buzzer, standing at the podium, and positioning himself for fast money rounds. He timed everything, understanding that spatial awareness and precise movement would be crucial. His family members would call out questions, and he would practice responding quickly while maintaining the composure and engagement that made for good television. His siblings teased him about his intensity, But they also recognized that Marcus approached every challenge with the same thorough preparation that had allowed him to excel throughout his life despite his blindness. The day of the taping arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves for the entire Richardson family. They faced off against the Martinez family from Arizona, another multi-generational household with strong family bonds and competitive spirits. When Steve Harvey walked onto the stage and began his characteristic pre-game banter, he immediately noticed Marcus's white cane and the way he oriented himself using audio cues. Steve approached Marcus during the family introductions with his typical warmth but also with visible curiosity. Marcus could hear the slight hesitation in Steve's voice, the way he chose his words carefully, trying to be respectful, while also acknowledging the obvious question that everyone in the studio was thinking. Steve asked Marcus directly how being blind would affect his ability to play the game. Marcus smiled and responded with a confidence that came from years of answering similar questions. He explained that he had excellent hearing and had memorized the stage layout. He told Steve that while he might not be able to see the board, he would know whether his answers were there by listening to the audience reactions and the sound effects. Steve seemed impressed by Marcus's preparation and self-assurance, and the exchange set a tone of respect rather than pity. The audience responded with warm applause, recognizing that they were about to witness something unusual, but approaching it with open minds, rather than predetermined assumptions about what a blind contestant could or could not do. The main game revealed Marcus's strategic thinking and his family's strong communication. He was not the primary player at the buzzer for most rounds, as his brother David had faster reflexes for that particular aspect of the game. But when Marcus did play, he demonstrated an uncanny ability to read the room. He would tilt his head slightly, listening to the minute sounds that others missed. The rustle of clothing as audience members leaned forward in anticipation, the barely audible intake of breath from contestants when a good answer was revealed, the subtle change in Steve Harvey's tone that indicated surprise or approval. These audio cues gave Marcus information that sighted contestants often missed because they were focused entirely on visual elements. During one particularly memorable round, the question was about things people do to relax after a stressful day. Marcus provided the answer, listen to music with absolute confidence. When the board revealed it as the number one answer, Steve Harvey's reaction was telling. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of surprise and dawning realization. Steve commented that, of course Marcus would know that. Music was the top answer. Given his work as a music teacher and his heightened appreciation for auditory experiences, the moment was significant because it highlighted how Marcus's different way of experiencing the world gave him unique insights rather than limitations. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, beginning to understand that they were witnessing not someone overcoming disability, but someone utilizing different abilities. The Richardson family won the main game with strong teamwork and strategic play. As they prepared for fast money, the family had to make a decision about who would play. Marcus's mother had played first in their practice sessions and was comfortable with the format. But for the second player, there was discussion about whether Marcus should take the spot or if his younger sister, who was also very quick with answers, would be better suited. Marcus made the case that he wanted to play, not to prove anything about blindness, but because he genuinely believed his preparation had made him one of their strongest players. The family agreed, trusting in his judgment and his abilities. Marcus's mother played first and scored 164 points, a solid performance that put the family in good position. They needed only 36 more points to win the $20,000 prize. For most contestants, this would be a comfortable margin. But there was palpable tension in the studio because many people, despite having watched Marcus perform well during the main game, still harbored doubts about whether a blind contestant could successfully complete fast money. The format required speed, precision, and the ability to think quickly under pressure. There were concerns about whether Marcus could maintain the rapid pace without visual cues about timing. Steve Harvey approached Marcus at the fast money podium with a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture of support that Marcus could feel. Steve's voice carried genuine emotion as he asked Marcus if he was ready. Marcus responded with calm assurance, explaining that he had his hand on the podium to orient himself and that he was prepared to answer as quickly as anyone else. Steve announced to the audience that they were about to witness something special, and the entire studio fell silent in anticipation. The 20 seconds began, and Steve launched into the questions with his characteristic rapid-fire delivery. The first question was, name a place where people spend too much money. Marcus answered immediately with, shopping mall, without any hesitation. His voice was clear and confident. The second question followed instantly. Name something people do when they cannot sleep. Marcus responded, count sheep, with the same quick precision. There was no pause, no uncertainty, just rapid, accurate responses. The third question came. Name a food that is better cold than hot. Marcus said, ice cream, so quickly that the words seemed to flow naturally from one question to the next. The fourth question arrived. Name something you might see at a circus. Marcus answered, elephants, maintaining the perfect rhythm. Then came the fifth and final question. Name a reason why someone might wear sunglasses indoors. For the first time, there was the briefest pause. The question had particular resonance given that Marcus himself wore dark glasses to protect his sensitive eyes from environmental irritation. But he did not give the obvious answer about vision impairment. Instead, he answered, they are a celebrity, and the buzzer sounded, marking the end of his 20 seconds. The audience erupted in applause at his performance. Steve Harvey stood looking at Marcus with an expression of genuine amazement. But the real test was about to come as they revealed whether his answers were on the board. Steve began with careful deliberation, building the suspense. Marcus had said shopping mall for a place where people spend too much money. The board revealed it as the number one answer, with 38 points. The audience cheered loudly, and Marcus smiled, tilting his head slightly as he processed the sound confirmation. Steve continued. Marcus had said count sheep for something people do when they cannot sleep. The board showed number one answer, with 29 points. Now there was real excitement building in the studio. 2 consecutive number one answers was impressive, regardless of whether the contestant could see or not. Steve's voice carried increased energy as he read the third answer. Ice cream, for a food that is better cold than hot. The board revealed number one answer, with 42 points. The studio audience was on their feet now, recognizing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Steve looked at Marcus with an expression that conveyed he was witnessing something that defied his understanding. 3 straight number one answers was exceptional. But there were 2 more to go. Steve announced the fourth answer. Elephants, 4. Something you might see at a circus. The board showed number one answer with 36 points. The studio exploded with noise. 4 consecutive number one answers had only happened a handful of times in the entire history of Family Feud. Steve Harvey, a man who had seen thousands of contestants and prided himself on never being truly surprised anymore, stood with his mouth open, staring at Marcus in disbelief. The entire studio held its breath as Steve prepared to reveal the final answer. He spoke slowly, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus had said celebrity for a reason why someone might wear sunglasses indoors. If this was the number one answer, Marcus would have achieved a perfect fast money round, something that had happened only once before in the show's long history. Steve paused dramatically, letting the tension build. Then the board revealed the answer. Number 1, with 31 points. The studio erupted into absolute chaos. The audience leaped to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building. Marcus's family rushed to embrace him, all of them crying and shouting with joy. But Marcus himself stood very still for a moment, his face showing an expression of quiet satisfaction rather than wild celebration. He had known the moment he heard the audience's reaction to that final answer. The sound told him everything he needed to know. He had achieved perfection. Steve Harvey walked over to Marcus and simply stood before him, shaking his head in wonder. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. He told Marcus that in all his years of hosting Family Feud, he had seen only one other perfect fast money round, and that he was struggling to process what had just happened. Steve said that Marcus had not just won the game, but had challenged everything Steve thought he understood about perception and ability. The host confessed that when he first saw Marcus's white cane, he had worried about how the contestant would manage the game. But Marcus had not just managed, He had achieved perfection in a way that seemed almost impossible. Marcus responded with characteristic grace and humility. He explained that his blindness had taught him to listen more carefully than most sighted people ever learned to do. He said that while others relied on their eyes as their primary sense, he had developed his hearing and his analytical thinking to compensate. But more importantly, he had prepared thoroughly because he respected the game and wanted to perform at his best. He emphasized that his achievement was not miraculous or inspirational simply because he was blind. It was the result of hard work, preparation, and the same competitive drive that any contestant would bring to the show. Steve Harvey's response to this was profound. He told Marcus and the audience that this moment had taught him something crucial about assumptions and limitations. Steve admitted that he had unconsciously lowered his expectations when he saw Marcus's disability, and he was ashamed of that initial reaction. What Marcus had demonstrated was that limitations exist primarily in the minds of observers, rather than in the abilities of individuals. Steve said that Marcus had given him and everyone watching a gift far more valuable than entertainment. He had shown them that their preconceptions about what was possible were often based on ignorance rather than reality. The conversation between Steve and Marcus continued beyond what would normally air in an episode. Steve asked questions about how Marcus had prepared, what strategies he had used, and how his other senses compensated for his lack of vision. Marcus explained his methodology patiently, describing how he had analyzed the audio patterns of previous episodes and studied the psychology of survey responses. He talked about how growing up blind had forced him to develop memory techniques and spatial reasoning that most sighted people never needed to cultivate. He described his work, teaching children with visual impairments, and his belief that society's biggest obstacle to disability inclusion was not the disabilities themselves, but the assumptions and low expectations that others projected onto disabled people. Steve was so moved by the conversation that he made an announcement to his production team right there on stage. He said that he wanted to do something unprecedented. He wanted the episode to include extended footage of his conversation with Marcus because the educational value of this moment transcended the normal entertainment format of the show. The producers agreed immediately, recognizing that they had captured something genuinely significant. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response exceeded anyone's expectations. The clip of Marcus's perfect fast money round went viral within hours, accumulating millions of views across social media platforms. But it was not just the achievement itself that captured public attention. It was the conversation that followed. The way Marcus articulated his experience and challenged misconceptions with patience and clarity. Disability rights organizations praised the segment for presenting a blind person as capable and accomplished, without resorting to the inspiration exploitation that often characterized media coverage of disabled people achieving ordinary things. Medical professionals and neurologists reached out to Marcus, asking to study his sensory processing abilities. They were fascinated by his description of how he used echolocation and auditory analysis to navigate the world. Research teams from 3 universities invited him to participate in studies examining neuroplasticity and sensory compensation in individuals with visual impairments. Marcus agreed to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to contribute to scientific understanding that might help other blind people develop their own compensatory skills. The impact on public perception of blindness and disability was measurable and significant. Organizations serving people with visual impairments reported increased interest in their programs. Parents of blind children reached out to Marcus, asking for advice and mentorship. Schools began incorporating his story into curriculum about challenging stereotypes and recognizing diverse abilities. The episode became required viewing in some medical schools as an example of how healthcare providers should approach disability with respect for patient capability, rather than assumptions about limitation. Steve Harvey himself was profoundly changed by the experience. In interviews following the episode's airing, he spoke frequently about what Marcus had taught him. Steve admitted that despite considering himself open-minded and progressive, he had held unconscious biases about disability that Marcus's performance had exposed and challenged. Steve began working with disability advocacy organizations and incorporated discussions about accessibility and inclusion into his various media platforms. The bangle that Priya Chandri had given him years earlier was joined in his office by a small audio recording device that Marcus had given him, a tool Marcus used to record his students' musical performances. Steve said both items reminded him that television was most powerful when it challenged audiences to expand their understanding of human potential. The $20,000 prize money was meaningful for the Richardson family. But the real value of the experience went far beyond financial gain. Marcus used his platform to advocate for better accessibility in education and employment. He gave talks at schools and corporations about disability inclusion, always emphasizing that accommodation and accessibility benefited everyone, not just disabled people. He spoke about universal design principles and how creating environments that worked for people with disabilities actually created better environments for all users. 3 months after the episode aired, Marcus received an invitation to testify before a congressional committee examining disability employment issues. He used the opportunity to discuss how media representation affected public perception and employment opportunities for disabled people. He argued that shows like Family Feud that presented disabled people as competent participants rather than inspirational figures or objects of pity played a crucial role in normalizing disability and challenging discrimination. His testimony was cited in subsequent policy discussions and helped inform new guidelines for federal disability employment programs. The relationship between Marcus and Steve Harvey continued long after the cameras stopped rolling. Steve invited Marcus to appear on his talk show multiple times, always approaching conversations with genuine curiosity and respect. During one appearance, Steve surprised Marcus by announcing that his foundation would be funding accessible music programs in schools, serving students with disabilities. Steve said that Marcus had shown him the power of quality education and mentorship, and he wanted to ensure that other young people with disabilities had access to the same opportunities that had allowed Marcus to thrive. Marcus's school received a substantial grant to expand its music program and purchase accessible instruments and technology. The publicity from Marcus's Family Feud appearance led to increased enrollment as parents who had never heard of the school learned about its innovative approaches to education for students with visual impairments. Marcus became the director of the music department, using his expanded platform to recruit talented teachers and develop curriculum that other schools could adapt for their own programs. 5 years after his Perfect Fast Money round, Marcus participated in a documentary about disability representation in media. The film examined how television and movies had historically portrayed disabled people, either as inspirational figures who existed primarily to motivate able-bodied viewers, or as tragic characters whose disabilities defined their entire existence. Marcus's Family Feud appearance was featured prominently as an example of representation that avoided these stereotypes. The documentary showed how Marcus was presented as a complete person who happened to be blind, rather than as a blind person whose disability was his primary characteristic. In the documentary, Marcus reflected on what his perfect score had meant beyond the immediate achievement. He explained that perfectionism was not his goal, but rather excellence through preparation and effort. He emphasized that his blindness was one aspect of his identity among many others. He was a teacher, a husband, a musician, a brother, and a competitor who enjoyed games and challenges. His blindness informed his experience, but did not limit his aspirations or capabilities. This nuanced self-representation challenged viewers to examine their own assumptions about disability and identity. Medical researchers who studied Marcus's sensory processing published findings that advanced understanding of neuroplasticity and compensation. Brain imaging studies showed that the visual cortex in Marcus's brain had been recruited for auditory processing, allowing him to process sound with exceptional speed and detail. These findings contributed to rehabilitation approaches for people who lost vision later in life, helping therapists develop more effective training programs for sensory compensation. Marcus was proud that his participation in research had practical applications that would benefit others. The story of Marcus's achievement became part of disability studies curriculum in universities around the world. Scholars analyzed the episode as a case study in media representation, examining how the framing of Marcus's achievement affected public perception. Some praised the presentation for treating Marcus as a regular contestant who happened to be blind. Others critiqued moments when his disability was emphasized in ways that might have been unnecessary. These academic discussions reflected the complexity of disability representation and the ongoing work of creating media that respected disabled people while acknowledging their experiences. 10 years after that remarkable Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was invited back to Family Feud for a celebrity edition featuring past contestants who had achieved memorable moments. Steve Harvey greeted him like an old friend, and their on-air reunion was warm and genuine. During the taping, Steve asked Marcus what the perfect fast money round had meant to him with a decade of perspective. Marcus's answer reflected his thoughtful approach to the experience. He said that the achievement itself was satisfying because he enjoyed competition and took pride in thorough preparation. But the lasting value was in how it had created opportunities for conversations about disability, inclusion, and the nature of ability itself. He said that if his appearance had helped even one employer reconsider their assumptions about hiring disabled workers, or one parent recognize their blind child's potential, then the experience had been worthwhile beyond any personal gain. He emphasized that his story was not unique, that countless disabled people achieved remarkable things every day without recognition or fanfare, and that society needed to better recognize and support the contributions of disabled people in all areas of life. Steve Harvey's response carried the weight of a decade of reflection and personal growth. He thanked Marcus for the education and the challenge to his own preconceptions. He said that Marcus had changed not just his show, but his understanding of human potential. Steve told the audience that the perfect fast money round had been perfect, not because all 5 answers were number 1, but because it had perfectly demonstrated that limitations exist primarily in minds of those who impose them, rather than in the capabilities of those who face them. The celebration that followed included Marcus's entire family, many of whom had remained close to Steve Harvey over the years. The Richardson family had used their experience and their winnings to strengthen their community connections and support causes they believed in. They had established a scholarship fund for students with disabilities pursuing education in arts and music. They volunteered with organizations serving blind and visually impaired children. They continued to challenge stereotypes through their everyday actions and their willingness to speak up when they encountered discrimination or low expectations. As this remarkable story reaches its conclusion, the lessons remain powerfully relevant. Marcus Richardson's perfect fast money round demonstrated that human capability extends far beyond what conventional wisdom might suggest. His achievement showed that thorough preparation, strategic thinking, and refusal to accept imposed limitations could lead to extraordinary outcomes. But perhaps most importantly, his story illustrated that the real barriers facing disabled people are often not their impairments, but the assumptions and prejudices of others. The way Marcus handled his moment in the spotlight with grace, humility, and clear-eyed analysis of systemic issues set a standard for how accomplished disabled people navigate public attention. He refused to be inspirational simply for existing while also recognizing that visibility and representation mattered for changing social attitudes. He celebrated his achievement while placing it in context as one example among many of disabled people's capabilities. This balanced approach made his advocacy more effective because it combined personal narrative with systemic analysis. If this story has changed how you think about disability, ability, or the assumptions we all carry about human potential, then hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is that in every community, there are Marcus Richardsons achieving remarkable things despite facing barriers that should not exist. The more we recognize and celebrate genuine capability while working to remove systemic obstacles, the closer we come to a world where everyone can develop and demonstrate their full potential regardless of disability status. Marcus showed us that perfection is not about seeing everything, but about perceiving what matters most, and preparing thoroughly to meet challenges with confidence and skill. That is a lesson we can all apply regardless of our individual circumstances or abilities.